The beam from Detective Morrison's flashlight sliced through the November rain like a blade, finding Elena huddled beneath the condemned 4th Street Bridge. Her ribs pressed against her soaked shirt like a cage with nothing left to protect. 27 years old, but looking 40, barely 100 pounds if you counted the rainwater weighing her down. Her pale green eyes had long lost their fire, and a faded scar ran down her left forearm, a reminder of the night she almost gave up entirely. "I told you yesterday, you filthy rat!" Morrison's voice dripped with contempt as he kicked her cardboard shelter apart, scattering her few possessions into the mud. "You're still here. That's loitering. That's vagrancy. That's my problem." Elena struggled to her feet, coughing violently, her diseased lungs burning with every breath. "I'm leaving. I'm just your garbage," Morrison interrupted, crushing the bag of aluminum cans she had spent a week collecting under his boot heel. "You know what people do with garbage? They throw it away." What Morrison didn't know, what he couldn't see through the sheets of rain hammering the bridge above, was that in exactly 47 seconds, an armored black Maybach worth $500,000 would hydroplane on the highway overhead. The driver, a mountain of a man named Marcus Donovan, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, known as the Devil of Manhattan, would lose control at 70 miles per hour. And the broken homeless woman Morrison was currently degrading would make a choice that would shake the entire criminal underworld of New York, because physics says a 100-pound woman cannot pull 200 pounds of unconscious muscle out of a submerged sinking vehicle in freezing water. But Elena Bennett had stopped believing in rules a long time ago. If this story satisfies your soul, hit the like button to tell me. Share it to those who need to be reminded that even the most broken people can become someone's miracle. And subscribe to follow this journey, because Ivy's story is just beginning. She saved a devil from drowning, never knowing that devil would burn the whole world down to save her in return. Morrison spat into the mud beside Ivy's foot and turned away. The beam of his flashlight cut once more through the rain like a blade slashing the dark before vanishing. The patrol engine roared. Red tail lights smeared into the downpour. Then everything fell silent. Elena stood there shaking. Rain ran down the cracks in her face as if the sky itself were crying for her. She knelt into the mud. Numb fingers searched blindly for whatever was left. The second jacket had been stomped into a puddle by Morrison. The water bottle was shattered. The aluminum cans Shed spent an entire week collecting were now crushed under his boots and not worth a single cent. But she picked them up anyway, one by one, because they were all she had. Her hand found the cheap necklace on her chest, where her mother's silver ring still hung. Cold, but still there, still there. She closed her eyes for a second and tried to remember her mother's voice, but the memory had faded like a photograph blurred by rain. Her mother had told her she had to live, but living like this was no different from dying. Elena was just about to stand when the sound tore through the night. Not thunder, not rain, but the scream of tires skidding on the highway above, sharp and desperate, rubber clawing at wet asphalt in the hopeless struggle of someone trying to wrestle life back from death. Then metal slammed into metal. The guardrail shattered. Elena looked up just as the black Maybach ripped through the barrier as if it were paper. The massive car hung suspended in the air for a moment that felt like forever. She saw it clearly. Every detail burned into her eyes. The armored luxury vehicle slowly turned in midair. Rain exploded around it like shattered crystals. Then gravity remembered its duty. The Maybach plunged nose first and struck the river with a sound like a bomb. Water shot 15 meters into the air. Waves crashed toward the bank where Elena stood. She watched the car sink. The front was already swallowed by black water. Only the rear was still visible, like the hand of a drowning man reaching up in a final plea. Through the window glass, she saw a figure, large, motionless head slumped over the steering wheel. On the highway above, there were horns, screams, someone calling 911. But down here by the river, there was only Elena in the sinking car. 60 seconds, maybe less. That was all the time the man inside had before the river claimed him forever. Her mind screamed at her to run. Who was she to save anyone? She couldn't even save herself. She was nothing but trash. Morrison was right. She was nothing at all. But her legs didn't listen. They carried her toward the river one step at a time, as if something else were moving her. Elena pulled off her outer jacket and threw it into the mud. Then the second one, then her torn shoes. She stood there in only a thin layer of clothing, shivering in the cold rain, staring at the black ink of the water waiting for her. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know if he was good or bad. She didn't know if he deserved to be saved. She only knew that someone was dying, and she was the only one who could do anything. When was the last time she felt she mattered? She couldn't remember. Maybe tonight she would. Or maybe tonight she would die with a stranger beneath the freezing river. Either way, at least she wouldn't die as someone useless. Elena drew a deep breath. Her lungs burned and whistled in pain. Then she threw herself into the water. The water hit her like the fist of death. 4. That was the temperature of the river in November. Cold enough to freeze blood in the veins. Cold enough to stop the heart if she stayed in it too long. The thermal shock blasted every thought out of Ivy's mind. Her lungs spasmed. Her body locked. And for 3 horrifying seconds, she forgot how to swim. She sank. Darkness swallowed her. Water flooded her nose and mouth. And she thought this was it. This was how she died. Not from hunger, not from illness, but because she was foolish enough to jump into a river to save a stranger. Then survival instinct struck. The instinct she had thought dead for a long time suddenly flared like fire in a storm. Her arms began to fan the water. Her legs began to kick, and she remembered distant summers when her mother was still alive, when they went to the public pool and her mother taught her how to float. "My daughter is strong," her mother said. "You can do anything you want." Elena kicked hard, her body cutting through ink-black water toward the sinking car. Every stroke was a battle. The current pulled her downstream, trying to carry her away like it carried so many other scraps of debris. But she was not debris, at least not tonight. She kicked wildly, swimming against the flow, her lungs beginning to burn from lack of oxygen and from the chronic illness that gnawed at her day by day. 10 meters, 5 meters. The Maybach loomed before her like a black monster being swallowed by the ocean. The front of the car was already completely submerged, water pouring in through every crack, dragging it deeper with each second. Elena dove down, her hands groping along the body of the car until they found the driver's side window. Through the glass, she saw him, the largest man she had ever seen in her life. Shoulders as wide as a doorway, chest like a barrel, head slumped against the deployed airbag, blood flowing from a wound on his forehead and staining the water around him red. He was motionless, maybe dead, maybe not. Elena had no time to check. She pulled the door handle. Locked? Of course it was locked. The impact had triggered the automatic system and turned the luxury car into a moving coffin. Iva's lungs began screaming for air. She had 30 seconds, maybe less, before she would have to surface or drown with this man. She looked around in desperation, her eyes stinging from the filthy river water, and she saw it. A broken chunk of concrete from the bridge pillar, half submerged on the riverbed. Elena grabbed it, her fingers clawing into stone and mud, nails breaking, skin tearing. But she didn't care. She lifted the block, heavy as if the whole world were pressing down on her shoulders, and struck the window. The first blow did nothing. The second made spiderweb cracks. The third, with every shred of strength left in her exhausted body, shattered the glass. Water rushed into the car like a waterfall, equalizing the pressure in an instant. Elena dropped the concrete, slipped through the broken frame, shards cutting into her arms and shoulders, but she felt no pain. She felt only one thing. This man had to live. She didn't know why it mattered. She only knew it did. Elena grabbed his collar, an expensive leather vest, and pulled. He was twice her weight. His body was like stone. But Elena had dragged heavier trash bags through crowded streets for a few coins. She had survived things worse than death. She would not be defeated by a river. She kicked, hauled him out of the car, out of death's grip, and began to swim upward. Every meter was a lifetime. Every kick was a prayer. Her lungs were about to burst. Her vision began to blur. Sparks of light danced before her eyes like fireflies in a graveyard. Then she broke the surface. Air flooded her lungs like life flooding the dead. She choked and vomited river water, but her hand never released the man's collar. She swam toward the bank, stroke by weak stroke, exhausted, and when her knees touched mud, she dragged him up, laid him on his back, then collapsed beside him. The night sky spun above her. Rain kept falling, cold and relentless. Elena lay there gasping, her body shaking uncontrollably, and she thought maybe tonight she would die from cold instead of drowning. But at least she would not die alone, and at least the man beside her was still breathing. She heard rescue sirens in the distance, saw flashlight beams sweeping the riverbank. They were coming. Someone was coming. Elena closed her eyes, and darkness held her like a mother holding a lost child who had finally found her way home. The beam of a flashlight swept across the riverbank and pulled Elena back from the edge of unconsciousness. She didn't know how long she had been lying there, maybe a few seconds, maybe a few minutes. But the shouting and the sound of running feet coming closer woke the survival instinct inside her. Not the instinct of a hero who had just saved a life, but the instinct of a homeless girl who had learned that other people's attention never brought anything good. The police would ask for papers. She didn't have any. They would ask for an address. She didn't have one. They would see her as a filthy drifter, and they would call Morrison. And Morrison would have an excuse to lock her somewhere she would never escape from. Elena clenched her teeth and forced her exhausted body upright. Her head spun, her stomach lurched, but she crawled toward the darkness beneath the bridge anyway. Inch by inch, fingernails scraping through mud, knees raw against gravel, she dragged herself into the place where the light couldn't reach. She looked back one last time. The rescue team had reached the man. They were pressing on his chest, giving him artificial breaths, doing everything Elena didn't know how to do. She saw his chest rise. She saw him cough. He was alive. Something inside her loosened. A knot she hadn't known she was carrying. She had done it. She, a homeless nobody, Morrison called trash, had saved a life. Maybe it was the only meaningful thing she had done in all of her 27 years of existence. Elena turned away and vanished into the darkness like a ghost, as if she had never been there. She didn't know that above her, on the corner of 4th Street Bridge, a traffic camera was recording. Its lens captured everything. The Maybach losing control, the plunge into the river, and a small, thin figure throwing herself into the water in the rain like a mad angel. The camera recorded the moment she broke the surface the second time, dragging a body twice her size behind her. It recorded her lying exhausted on the riverbank, shaking like a leaf in a storm. And it recorded her crawling into the darkness, disappearing from the scene before anyone could see her face. The image was blurred and smeared by rain, but still clear enough to show that something impossible had happened. A tiny woman had done what physics said could not be done. And then she vanished as if she had never existed. The ambulance roared, blue and red lights tearing through the night. Marcus Donovan was placed on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, blood still seeping from the wound on his head. No one knew the man they were saving was the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast. No one knew the car that had sunk into the river was worth $500,000 and armored against bullets. And no one, not even Marcus himself, knew that the person who had pulled him from death's jaws was only a homeless girl weighing 45 kilograms, shivering in the darkness not far away, coughing up blood and praying she would survive the night. But in the days to come, when the devil of Manhattan woke up and learned that he was still alive, he would find that video, and he would turn the entire city upside down to find the ghost who had saved his life. Marcus Donovan opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was the stark white ceiling of a room he knew better than any hospital in the world. This was the Donovan family secret medical facility buried deep inside an ordinary office building in Manhattan where Dr. Samuel Hayes had stitched him and his men back together through countless bullet wounds, knife cuts, and injuries no public hospital was ever allowed to know about. His head throbbed as if someone were hammering at it from the inside. He tried to sit up, but his body refused, and a hand pressed down on his shoulder, forcing him flat again. "Stay still, boss," Raphael's voice said beside him, familiar and tight with strain. "You almost died." Marcus turned his head and looked at the man who had followed him for 15 years, the man he trusted more than blood, because blood could betray you, and Raphael could not. Raphael's face was paler than usual, his beard patchy as if he hadn't slept for days, and his eyes held something Marcus rarely saw in anyone: real fear. "What happened?" Marcus asked, his voice rough as if he had swallowed the entire river. And then he remembered. Rain, the highway, brakes failing, the guardrail breaking, black water. "The car was sabotaged," Raphael said bluntly. "No detours. The brake line was cut. Professional, clean, almost no trace, but Dante checked the wreck under the river and found evidence." Marcus closed his eyes for a second. The brakes were cut. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone reckless enough, stupid enough, or desperate enough to go after the devil of Manhattan. "Romano?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. 9%? Raphael nodded. "That bastard has wanted to topple you for a long time." Maybe he thought this was the right moment. Marcus would deal with Romano later. He would tear him apart piece by piece and send him back to his family in separate boxes. But right now, something else gnawed his mind. A faint memory, a vague sense of small hands gripping his collar, of his body being dragged through freezing water. "Who pulled me out of the car?" he asked. Raphael was silent for a moment, and that silence said more than any answer. "That's the strangest part," Raphael said as he took out a tablet, swiped the screen a few times, and handed it to Marcus. "We got the traffic camera footage. You need to see this." Marcus took the tablet, pressed play, and watched. The video quality was poor, blurred by rain and darkness, but still clear enough to show what happened. The Maybach tearing through the guardrail, the plunge into the river, and then a figure, small, thin, throwing herself into the water like a mad woman. Marcus watched the figure vanish beneath the surface, and he counted 10 seconds, 20, 30, long enough that he thought she had drowned. Then she surfaced, and she was dragging him with her. A woman who couldn't have weighed more than half of him, pulling him through the current, swimming upstream with his body like an anchor tied to her throat. She hauled him onto the bank. She lay there shaking, exhausted. And when the rescue team came close, she crawled into the darkness and disappeared like a ghost. "Who is she?" Marcus asked, his eyes still fixed on the screen, on the fading shape dissolving into night. "We don't know yet. No face, no identity, only that she was under the 4th Street Bridge that night, probably homeless." Marcus touched the screen and froze the frame at the last moment before the ghost vanished. He stared at the small silhouette that had risked her life in freezing water to save a man she didn't know, a man she might have let drown if she'd known who he was. "Find her," Marcus said, his voice no longer weak but cold again, with the familiar steel of the Devil of Manhattan. "Turn this whole city upside down if you have to. Find her and bring her here. 3 days, 72 hours. That was how long Marcus Donovan's people tore apart the area around 4th Street Bridge looking for a ghost. They questioned other homeless people, small-time drug dealers on street corners, the girls who worked the night streets looking for clients, anyone who might have seen a thin woman with tangled brown hair. Most shook their heads. Some spoke of a girl they sometimes saw under the bridge, silent as a shadow, never bothering anyone, never asking for anything. They called her the Ghost. The irony was sharp. Dante was the one who found her. The quiet 28-year-old driver and bodyguard followed faint traces from under the bridge to the eastern junkyard, from the junkyard to an abandoned church, and finally to a dark alley 2 blocks from 4th Street Bridge. She was there, curled up behind a large dumpster, her body shaking uncontrollably, even though her lips were blue with cold. Dante almost walked past her without noticing. Because she was so small, she nearly dissolved into the dark, just a pile of rags among garbage. Then she coughed, a wet, bloody cough that tore from her lungs. And Dante stopped. He knelt beside her, and what he saw made even a man used to death shudder. She was burning, not burning in flame, but burning with fever so high her skin radiated heat, even while her body shook with cold. Her breathing was ragged and wet, every breath a battle she was slowly losing. Her eyes were half open, but saw nothing, only 2 pale green discs sinking into unconsciousness. Pneumonia, Dante realized at once. She had been in the cold water too long that night, and her exhausted body had no strength to fight anything. She was dying right here in this filthy alley between dumpsters and stench. The ghost who had saved the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast was dying, and no one in the world cared. Dante pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. 1 ring and Marcus' voice came on, cold and impatient. "Have you found her?" "I have." Dante looked down at the small, shivering body at his feet, listened to her weak, wheezing breath like water seeping through a crack. "But there's a problem, boss. She's dying." Silence on the other end, long and heavy. Then Marcus' voice came again, and for the first time Dante heard something in it besides coldness. "Bring her here immediately. Call Dr. Hayes and have everything ready. She mustn't die. Do you hear me? She mustn't die." Dante ended the call, took off his jacket, and wrapped it around Elena's thin body. She was light as a child when he lifted her. So light, he wondered how this body could have dragged a man weighing 90 kilograms from a sinking car. "She mustn't die," he whispered. Marcus' order again like a prayer. "Hold on, Ghost. My boss owes you his life." Elena woke up and didn't know where she was, and that was the first thing that frightened her, because for the past 2 years she had always known exactly where she was, under 4th Street Bridge, among concrete and rust and the roar of traffic above. But this was not under the bridge. This place was soft, warm, and smelled clean, a smell she had forgotten a long time ago. She lay on a bed larger than any she had ever seen in her life, with white satin sheets smooth as water, and a comforter so thick she felt as if she were sinking into a cloud. The room around her was as big as the apartment she and her mother once lived in, with red velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and paintings on the walls she didn't understand but knew were worth more than her life. Elena tried to sit up, but her body refused. An intravenous line was in her hand, and she realized there was a heart monitor beeping steadily beside the bed. Where was she? Who had brought her here? And why? The door opened, and Elena had the answer to at least one of those questions. The man who entered was so tall he had to dip his head slightly to pass through the doorway, shoulders as wide as a window frame, muscles shifting under an expensive black shirt, and a face carved from marble with a square jaw, a straight nose, and steel-gray eyes. A faint scar ran from the corner of his left eye down his cheekbone, not making him uglier, but more dangerous. This was the man she had pulled from the sinking car. She knew it instantly, even though that night she had only seen him through darkness and muddy water. That massive build, that heavy weight as she dragged him through the current. It couldn't be anyone else. He was alive, and he was standing here looking at her with eyes she couldn't read. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He only stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then he stepped forward, drew a luxurious armchair to the bedside, and sat down, still keeping distance, but close enough that she could see every line of his face. "You're the one who saved me," he said, his voice low and rough. A statement, not a question. Elena didn't answer. She had no strength to, and she didn't know what to say. "Why?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, his gray eyes drilling into hers as if he wanted to dig the answer out of her soul. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know what I did. You jumped into freezing water to save a stranger." "Why?" Elena looked straight into his eyes and saw no reason to lie. "Because you were dying, and I was the only one who could do anything." Marcus blinked as if that answer wasn't in any of the scripts he'd prepared. "You didn't know who I was?" he asked again with a trace of doubt. "Should I have known who you were?" Elena asked back, and for the first time she saw something on his face other than coldness. Surprise? Real surprise. "I'm Marcus Donovan," he said the name as if it explained everything. Elena waited for the familiar feeling, for fear or recognition to strike, but nothing came. The name meant nothing to her. She had lived under a bridge for 2 years, hadn't read newspapers, hadn't watched the news, hadn't cared about anything except surviving each day. "I don't know who you are," she repeated, her voice from a dry throat. "And does that matter?" Marcus leaned back, and Elena realized he was looking at her differently now. Not looking down at her the way Morrison had, not looking through her the way the rest of the world did, but looking directly at her as if she were a real person worth seeing. "You're not afraid of me," he said. Not a question, but an astonished observation. "I stopped being afraid a long time ago," Elena answered. And she wasn't lying. She had lived through things worse than anything a mafia boss could do to her. She had been to the bottom and learned that when you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear. Marcus looked at her for a long time, his gray eyes deep and unreadable. Then he did something Elena didn't expect. He smiled, not wide or warm, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it changed his whole face. For the first time, he said softly, as if to himself more than to her, "For the first time, someone has looked me in the eye without trembling." Elena didn't know what that meant. She only knew she was trapped in this room, in this man's world, and had no way out. But strangely, she didn't feel the need to escape. For the first time in a long while, she felt that someone truly saw her. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, and looked out with his back to Elena, as if he were weighing something important. "In my world," he began, his voice low and unhurried, "there are rules no one is allowed to break. And one of those rules is about debt." He turned back to her, gray eyes sharp, but no longer threatening. "You saved my life. That's the greatest debt a person can owe. And I, Marcus Donovan, don't leave debts unpaid." Elena wanted to say she didn't need him to repay anything, that she only wanted to leave and go back to her life under the bridge, no matter how miserable that life was.